Main event for the night, the main speech. So about the speaker, Shannon al-Wakeel is a community lawyer with expertise in human civil rights and the impacts of national security policing. She was one of 4 women who founded Muslim Justice League, a nonprofit advocating for rights that are threatened under national security pretexts. After federal announcements that Boston would be a pilot city for the Countering Violent Extremism campaign. She also served as MJL's first executive director. Shannon has previously worked with Massachusetts Law Reform Institute and later Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. Her advocacy has contributed to advances in immigrant access to education and healthcare and defeat of scores of anti-immigrant legislative proposals. There's Shannon. Could we please have a salawat to welcome her?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak with you and present my thoughts tonight. In these last final days of Fatima, I was asked to speak, of course, on the topic of justice, seeking justice in an unjust world. And while I have my thoughts, I'm by no means a theologian or an expert on al-Wakeel. I just have my own knowledge and my own perspective. And so I would love it if at the end of my remarks we have some time for discussion, and feel free to share your thoughts, challenge my thoughts, or bring up anything else that you feel moved to. Salawat. So I'll start with a bit of context on Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam's life, although apologies in advance that it's going to be, I'm sure, repetitive for many or most of you. As a convert myself, I can say that I always appreciated when folks kind of took the time to spell out some of the more well-known stories. It was one of the primary ways that I learned. So Fatima bint Muhammad, Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, of course, was the daughter of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and Lady Khadija. She's well known for her devotion as a daughter, as a wife, and as a mother. And in particular, there are many stories of her kindness and care for her father, the Prophet. For example, when his detractors would harass him, throwing things at him in the street, or even when he was praying, or leaving thorns in the path of his home so that he would step on them and get injured, Fatima, who was just a child, would tend to him, would help clean him up, to the point where her father, the Prophet, would nickname her mother of her father, Fatima Abiha. She, of course, was also the wife of Imam Ali, alayhi salam, and their life together was materially very humble. So they were both known for their great charity, even though they had very little themselves during that time. One great example is that ahead of their wedding, Lady Fatima had no elegant dress to wear. She had only her old patched up dresses. And so her father, the Prophet, bought her a beautiful dress for her to wear. And yet she was visited by a very destitute person who came to her door and knocked and said, basically asked for some charity. And Lady Fatima initially was moved to give one of her older dresses, and then she remembered a verse of the Quran, Al-Imran, verse 92, and she gave her new brilliant dress that was supposed to be for her wedding. She remembered that that verse said, "You will never achieve righteousness unless you are willing to give away that which you hold most dear yourself." Right? So the story continues that actually when she was preparing for her wedding on her wedding night, the angel Jibreel gave a new dress, a beautiful dress, to her father, who passed it along to her in any event. And along with being so charitable, Fatima was also incredibly knowledgeable, not only in the sense of rote memorization, but in the sense of having, giving thought, introspection, and putting reason to develop her knowledge. And it was so well known that she was very knowledgeable about the Quran and about matters of religion that community members, if they didn't want to bother her father, or if he was away, would visit her and ask for her interpretations and advice about religion. Her famous sermon of Fadak is also an example of her extreme knowledge, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was dying, he told Fatima that she would be the next to join him, which of course meant she would be the next to die. And she was. And in the interim, her very short life was dramatically changed, not just of course by the loss of the Prophet, who was her father, being so dear to him, so dear to her, but by the dramatic political shift as well, which left her incredibly vulnerable. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Salawat? After the Prophet's death, as we know, his companions made the decision at the meeting of Saqifa to pass leadership on to Abu Bakr. In spite of the Prophet's clear declaration prior at Ghadir that Imam Ali alayhi salam would be his successor. And Abu Bakr then confiscated Lady Fatima's inheritance, including specifically the land at Fadak, which had been gifted to her by the Prophet. Umar ibn al-Khattab and a group of armed men came to her and Ali's home to demand the allegiance of Imam Ali to Abu Bakr, and they threatened to burn their home down if they didn't give allegiance. Umar's men then forced their way into his home, and as we know, Fatima was crushed behind the door. That is how she broke her ribs and miscarried her unborn son, Muslim. And she didn't live long after that. She died within 3 months of the Prophet's death, at the very young age of 18. When she knew her death was approaching, Fatima asked her husband Ali to take care of her body in certain ways, to carry her body at night, not to tell Umar or Abu Bakr about her death so that they wouldn't come to her funeral rites, and to personally bury her, and he did so in a secret location. She left behind 4 children, though she was only 18. Imam Hussein, Imam Hassan, Zainab, and Kulthum was only 1.5 years old at the time. Salawat. So even in that incredibly short and tragic life, Lady Fatima left us a great deal to reflect on, a great deal to learn from. And I do want to return for a minute to the sermon at Fadak that I mentioned earlier as an example of her extraordinary knowledge, because I believe it provides actually an excellent grounding for us to consider some of the lessons about pursuit of justice in an unjust world. So Abu Bakr was himself about 59 when he became caliph, confiscating her inheritance, claiming that the Prophet had told him that prophets do not leave inheritance. And when she learned that her inheritance had been confiscated, she went to the mosque of Muhammad and interrupted a sermon of Abu Bakr to give her own, and that was the Khutbah Fadak. She began by recounting at length the many blessings of Allah, giving gratitude. The portion of her sermon that recounts blessings and beneficial purposes of various aspects of Islam, from prayer and fasting and jihad and enjoining good, avoiding slander. This portion alone could easily have constituted a complete sermon of its own. But she continued then, and she addresses the injustice that prompted her to go to the mosque at that particular moment. She goes on to remind the congregants that she is the daughter of the messenger, peace be upon him, and of the ways that he radically changed them for the better. And then she chastises them for the wrong of denying Imam Ali the succession as leader. She says, while the era of the Prophet was still near, the gash was still wide, the scar had not yet healed, and the messenger was not yet buried. A quick undertaking, you claimed, aimed at preventing discord. And then she speaks specifically to her denial of inheritance, and I'm going to read some excerpts, again in English because you don't want to hear me struggle through the Arabic. O Muslims, will my inheritance be usurped? O son of Abu Quhafa, where is it in the book of Allah that you inherit your father, and I do not inherit mine? Surely you have come up with an unprecedented thing. Do you intentionally abandon the book of Allah and cast it behind your back? Do you not read where it says, and Sulaiman inherited Dawood? Later, so here you are, take it. But if shall encounter you on the day of gathering, What a wonderful judge is Allah, a claimant is Muhammad, and a day is the day of rising. At the time of the hour shall the wrongdoers lose, and it shall not benefit you to regret your actions then. For every message there is a time limit. O you people of intellect, the strong supporters of the nation, and those who embraced Islam, what is this shortcoming in defending my right? And what is this slumber while you see injustice being done to me? Did not the messenger of Allah, my father, used to say, a man is upheld by his children? Oh, how quick you have violated his orders. How soon have you plotted against us, but you are still capable of helping me in my attempt and powerful to help me in that which I request and in my pursuit of it. Or do you say, Muhammad has perished? O you people of reflection, you are numerous and well equipped. You have the means and the power, the weapons and the shields. Yet the call reaches you, but you do not answer. The cry comes to you, but you do not come to help. While you are characterized by struggle, known for goodness and welfare, the selected group, and the best ones chosen by the messenger for us, al-Bayt. Nevertheless, I see that you are inclined to easy living. Dismissed he who is more worthy of guardianship. I am the daughter of a warner, she concludes, to you against a severe punishment. So act, and so will we, and wait, and we shall wait. Salawat. There are a few points in Fatima Zahra's sermon that struck me as especially relevant today if we're discussing pursuit of justice, and they may be striking you in the same way as I read those excerpts, but I just want to kind of highlight the reasons why I chose those portions. She references inheritance as a matter of law and the lack of inheritance as an aberration. She says, will my inheritance be usurped? She references the day of judgment and the limited time on earth we have to rectify injustice. For every message, there is a time limit. She decries the inaction and complacency of the believers. What is this slumber while you see injustice being done toward me? And she notes that Muslims actually have the power, they're just not choosing to leverage it. It's a matter of political will rather than resources. You are numerous and well equipped. You have the means and power. Nevertheless, I see that you are inclined towards easy living. And finally, she concludes with one last call to action. I am the daughter of a warner to you against a severe punishment. So act, and so will we, and wait, and we shall wait, presumably for the day of judgment. How should the Muslims of Fatima's day have responded to this khutbah? Should they have nodded and smiled, applauded, maybe spoken to one another about how this sermon gave them hope for the youth of today, how they're going to make it all right? That wasn't what she wanted. She was calling for action, right? It was a call to action. It was not a speech to record for history books her and Imam Ali's personal injuries either. That was certainly a portion of it, but this was more about more than the tangible things inherited by Lady Fatima as an individual. It was about a political structure that had implications for the rights of everyone. And I believe that this khutbah was also, in many ways, it continues to be, a sermon about the rights of youth, and including what is owed to them by the community at large and their elders. So as we know, Abu Bakr did not return the land of Falak to Fatima. In part, his doing so would have involved implicit acknowledgement of Imam Ali's claim to succession, and he apparently felt he couldn't risk that. But it was therefore a decision that was about more than his own desire for this parcel of land and more about enforcing a political structure. Salawat. So in reflecting on these lessons from the life of Lady Fatima alayha salam, related to seeking justice in an unjust world, I found the portions of her khutbah that speak to inheritance to be especially thought-provoking and easily, eerily contemporary in a way. In the present, what sort of inheritance are we believers responsible for ensuring is rightfully protected from confiscation? What comes to my mind is that each day of our lifetimes, the unjust seizure of the remaining resources and habitability of our Earth is continuing unabated, largely due to the same factors that were responsible for the denial of the inheritance of al-Wakeel, the enforcement of a prevailing political structure, and some level of complacency that obstructs our ability to organize and exercise political will. And this is denying our children and theirs their basic rights to the necessities that many of us inherited from our parents' generations, right? Reliable, clean water, stable food sources, protection from disease, the ability to plan and rebuild, breathable air. All of these things are at risk, and already in many parts of the world, people are losing them. People are losing their lives. Children are losing their inheritance. There are many young activists around the world who've been calling for an end to our exploitative, extractive abuse of the planet, and an urgent, dramatic, disciplined commitment to protect what remains, so that today's children and their children, and perhaps even grandchildren, can be spared the most horrific effects of climate crisis. In other words, they're calling for climate justice. And I believe that all of us here care about climate justice, but the feeling that it is an insurmountable challenge for any one person or small group to take on can lead to paralysis, and I speak for myself here, and procrastination and complacency. We know that while some major individual life changes can have an impact, things like radically altering our diet or stopping or dramatically reducing our air travel, especially by communities with large carbon footprints, and that there's some contagion in that, right? When our neighbors see each other doing these things, they're inspired to follow suit and think this is doable and we can have an effect as a group. But they won't be enough on their own. Dramatic structural change at the highest levels is needed, and it would be false to say that we're all equally responsible for this climate crisis. We know that we're not. Just as in Abu Bakr's day, there are some who bore more responsibility than others, right? We have to name the specific entities and processes that are responsible: the extractive energy industry, corporations who lobby against green energy, and frankly, war and militarization. The US military is, according to the Union of Concerned Scientists, the largest institutional consumer of oil in the world. It's not surprising. It's also a huge portion of our budget, right? But naming those responsible and recognizing the extreme limits of our individual power doesn't relieve us of the responsibility to act. It's false to say we're powerless. The Muslims that Lady Fatima was calling upon to help her were not simply those directly responsible. She wasn't necessarily trying to convince Abu Bakr. They were the bystanders. Of course, it would have been more difficult for them to organize, but they did have power amongst themselves. Fatima Zahra said, "You are numerous and well-equipped. You have the means and the power. Nevertheless, I see that you are inclined to easy living." And while it may have been true 30 years ago, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, to say that we didn't know what was needed to limit the worst impacts of the climate crisis, we didn't have the technologies available, that is no longer true. That is no longer true. Even from an economic standpoint, we know that we have the ability to change. It's a matter of political will. We even have legislation that folks have taken the time to draft, right? That sets out a just transition. But there were so many youth activists for climate justice around the world, I struggled with who to mention in the final part of the discussion, but I did want to share some of their voices, so I chose at least one. I chose one specifically. Her name is Vanessa Nakate. She's a climate activist in her early 20s in Uganda, who gave a recent interview in December with Democracy Now!, and I chose some of her words tonight, specifically because she highlights the horrific impacts of girls of climate change, of the climate crisis. And because we are remembering Lady Fatima alayhi salam, I think it's incumbent on us to recognize the ways that women and girls are at the front line of climate injustice and the burdens that they bear. So Vanessa Nakate in her interview explained that she's describing what she's witnessing in Uganda. "We've seen the impact through torrential rainfall that has destroyed a number of things in my country. It has been raining since September up to now every day." This was December. "It doesn't miss a chance, and each time it rains, these rains are so heavy and that they cause floods that kill people. People's homes have been destroyed as a result of floods. Farms have been destroyed as a result of floods. And this is a crisis to the people of Uganda. There are areas that experience extreme drought, and this is affecting the crop production in those areas. So if our farms are destroyed by floods, if the farms are destroyed by droughts, and crop production is less, that means that the price of food is going to go high. So it will only be the most privileged who will be able to survive the crisis of food. Whereas most of the people who live in villages and rural communities, they have trouble getting food because of the high prices. And this leads to starvation and death. Literally in my country, a lack of rain means starvation and death for the less privileged. And it's the girl child who suffers the most. Because when the family has no hope for the future, that means that they will have to give away their daughters for marriage at young ages. 15 years old, 16 years old. It's because it is the only way of survival. No 15-year-old wants to get married to an old man. And this all points to the climate crisis. When their only hope, that is the farms and the crops that they have, is destroyed, they are only left with giving up their daughters for marriage to get something in exchange. Salawat. So we know the requirement to support and pursue justice entails a requirement to become knowledgeable and to refuse to be guided by self-interest in the narrow sense of our lives in this dunya. We must work to discern the side of justice, amplify the voices of those who are oppressed, identify our power, and most importantly, act to use that power. And in the case of the climate crisis today, the inheritance of our neighbors' children in countries that may seem remote or in states that are in fact nearby, Puerto Rico, Brazil, Bangladesh, Uganda, Australia, Canada, it's being usurped due to the relentless, rapacious extraction of a political and economic system that we, as Americans, have a primary role in upholding and enforcing. And tomorrow it will be our own children's inheritance that's affected. Lady Fatima noted, for every message there is a time limit. Not only in terms of our facing justice after our deaths, but in terms of a window to limit the harm to current children on God's earth and return as much of their rightful inheritance to them as possible. This message should speak loudly to us, I believe, today. There's also in the earlier part of Lady Fatima's sermon of Fadak, in the portion in which she is expressing gratitude for the various blessings from Allah and the various aspects of Islam that have helped guide the believers, a part where she refers to justice as a harmony of the hearts. And that spoke to me in an unexpected way. In the society that I've grown up in, I'm not used to hearing justice characterized that way. We so often hear it coupled with ideas of retribution, punishment. But how beautiful to think about justice as a harmony in the hearts, suggesting an absence of guilt, an absence of fear, a connection with people everywhere. And when we work to ensure others are treated justly, we can be free from the guilty knowledge that our comfort is at another's expense, and the fear that we will have to face those who we've wronged. And instead we can feel secure in our caring connection with others, a harmony of the hearts. Plural. I'll leave us with that. Salawat. Thank you for giving me the time for these remarks.
We can do a discussion if you want to.
Yeah, I did want to open it up in case anybody had thoughts that they wanted to share, either related to what I shared or completely different in ways that you want to remember Bibi Fatima.